Joining me now, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who really doesn't need an intro, but allow me to give him one. He was, of course, counterterrorism coordinator on Reagan's NSC staff, CEO of Fidelis Publishing, and he's the author of the book, We Didn't Fight for Socialism. Colonel, I'm going to begin with the Taliban. We are apparently getting punked once again by these people on the world stage. They're not going to help fight extremism. There's a rumor floating out there. We're going to be giving them humanitarian aid. Colonel, how much more embarrassing can our foreign policy get?
Oh, it's going to. You wait till after the Communist Chinese take over Bagram Air Force Base, or Bagram Air Base. It was the best military installation in all of Southwest Asia. The Communist Chinese are right now negotiating with the Taliban to give them the rights to it. They're going to pay for it, of course, and the Taliban needs money. It's going to be enormous bribes with the Communist Chinese gaining control of that base and, of course, limiting what we can do in that part of the world. That means that we're not going to certainly launch an air attack on what's left out there of the billions and billions of dollars worth of equipment we left behind. So it's about to get a whole lot worse, I can tell you that.
Colonel, some of us, that would be you, are highly decorated officers in the Marine Corps. Some of us were very average NCOs. Would you please explain for people like me why Bagram is important?
Well, Bagram gave us the ability to launch, first of all, search and recovery assets. So we keep hearing from Biden that he's got this over-the-horizon capability. We don't. If you needed proof of that, all you'd have to do is look at what happened on the 29th with a unmanned aerial vehicle, not a drone, launching a Hellfire missile, killing an AID contractor. The AID, by the way, is Agency for International Development. And we killed him and 7 children in that vehicle because we really don't have an over-the-horizon capability. We don't have any ability to launch recovery missions for aircraft of ours that go down. We've obviously seen that they're not going to do anything to support any kind of resistance movement out of this government. We can't even figure out how many Americans are still left on the ground. Green card holders and SIVs, that's the special immigrant visas held by, or at least processed by, our government for those who helped us out. There were tens of thousands of them. The Communist Chinese and the Russian GRU are helping to hunt them down and kill them, murder them in horrible atrocities right in front of their women and children and townspeople around.
What is wrong with our foreign policy? How do all these fancy brains and fancy degrees and fancy generals, how do they get it wrong every single time? What is missing? What's wrong?
Well, we hear him say it all the time, that, quote, the buck stops here. That was, of course, that was right there on Harry Truman's desk. So he'd look at it before he had to make a decision. And Harry Truman had to make some very tough decisions. What we've got now at the top of the pyramid at the 5-sided wastebasket, we call the Pentagon, is a crowd of officers who were selected originally to be promoted from colonel or captain in the U.S. Navy or Coast Guard all the way up to brigadier general. And they were all screened by the so-called Obama administration before they got those ranks. And what you're now looking at is everybody who's a 4-star, 3-star, or a 4-star, regardless of what service they're in. They were all handpicked by Obama way back when. Trump didn't get to make many appointments as lieutenant general. He got to pick Milley, and Milley, of course, was screened before just to make brigadier general by the Obama administration. The Secretary of Defense, Austin, is quite frankly, he's a person who is incapable of telling the President of the United States, this is wrong. Nobody stood up at the 11th hour and said, what we're going to do is going to be catastrophic. We heard that from Milley and from all of the 3 of them sitting there at the table before both the House and the Senate committees, and yet none of them quit. None of them said, oh, what we're going to do is going to be disastrous, and it has been disastrous. And all of that because someone else is giving advice to the President of the United States. God knows who it is. We've heard all kinds of speculation as to who it might be. We know who it isn't. It's the people who are supposed to be giving him military advice, and he's ignoring it. Now, is he ignoring that because he's not competent to make a proper decision? Or is it because there's leverage being exerted against him by the Communist Chinese? We need to ask those kinds of questions. And that's why I've suggested now for weeks, what ought to happen is there ought to be a congressional joint, exactly bilateral, have no political twists in it whatsoever. Commission. I've got a little familiarity with a presidential commission. It went on for months, and they got the right answers. They got the truth. We've not had that. You can't do that in 5-minute intervals like they did it in the House and the Senate committees. By the time you get to start explaining something, time is up, and the committees enforce that. What we need is that kind of bipartisan commission. That's what it's called. It ought to be called a commission. And they ought to convene it now and take whatever time it takes to, for example, get the transcripts of the phone calls that Milei made. Get the transcript of the 90-minute telephone call that this president had with Xi Jinping. In the aftermath, he bragged about the fact that he talked for 90 minutes. What was it about? They said it was a frank and open exchange. Well, it's not unless the American people can find out from those who have the authority, and they deserve to have that authority. It's called oversight over our armed forces and our national security. This is a disaster, and somebody needs to be held accountable. As thus far, no one has been.
Hey, thanks so much for watching the first on YouTube. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe. You heard me. Like it, subscribe. You'll get a lot more of it and a lot more of me.